My name is Reagan Allen, North Carolina State reporter for the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. I'm sitting here with Eric Schansberg. He is the author of College 101, What Students and Parents Should Know About Universities. Thank you for sitting here with me. One of my first questions is, what motivated you to write College 101? Was there a particular experience with students and families that highlighted the need for this guide?
Labor economists are very helpful here because we talk about education serving two primary functions. The first is the traditional function, which is to build human capital. So that's just a fancy term in economics for the skills and the experiences and the value that you bring to the workplace. And that's the kind of stuff that you certainly hope to experience in college that you're going to learn. Let's say you're going into accounting and you better learn a bunch of stuff about accounting while you're there. And it's not just accounting, it's broader business knowledge, right? It's not simply accounting. Imagine a college degree that was only 10 accounting courses. Well, that's really different than a business degree. And then another level of that is what's called gen ed, right? There's a bunch of other courses they have you guys take. And that's presuming that a broadening of your education is valuable, that learning how to think in areas where you're not very good at thinking is a helpful exercise, exposing you to other areas. So there's a bunch of aspects there about education. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. How should students balance institutional prestige with academic fit and
Yeah.
post-graduation outcomes?
Yeah, so back to I'm sorry, I got lost there. On the human capital part of it, right? So you're picking up all these things, and it can be even broader skills like how to do a presentation or how to manage your time or soft skills, networking, right? There's a bunch of that stuff that occurs in college, and all of it would be lumped into what's called human capital. Second thing in education is called signaling or screening, or a credential might be the way you think of it outside of an econ classroom. The signaling is that when you get an education, you're signaling to employers in a world of highly imperfect information that there's something different about you because you have the college degree. And this goes not just for attending college, but where you went, what's your major, what's your GPA, what's that resume look like? Because employers are in a very difficult position trying to figure out who to hire. And so education serves as really valuable signal from the employee to the employer. From the employer's perspective, we might refer to it as a screen. And so employers are looking for people, they're screening the candidates, and they might say, look, I'm not going to look at people that have a GPA below 2.5, or I'm not going to look for people that went to, such and such a school or whatever, right? So there's these signals that are being sent by employees to employers, and there's a screening that's taking place of employers toward employees. The language that's used outside of econ is credential. And so you're looking at, hey, I just want the degree, man. I don't really want to learn a bunch of stuff. I just want the credential, and I want the credential from a good school because, again, that sends a signal. And so you have both of these things in education, and they're kind of messy and they're kind of related. You're picking up human capital, but you're also picking up the credential. Both of them have a value to society, both of them have a value to the individual, but pressing on them, right? You want human capital, all things equal, but part of you kind of wants to coast through your classes and not really pick up a lot, but at least I got the credential. All right. So it's not clear what that'll do for you in the long run, but at least in the short run, that would help you get a good job to start off with and on and on. So students, back to your question then, students have to think about both of those pieces. You're there for human capital. Now you're going to relax on some of that. You're going to coast through this course, or you're going to use AI too much in this course. And, there's a variety of things here. And you also care about the credential because ultimately you have to get a job and you're in a world of imperfect information. And it does matter where you go to school. But students need to think about both of those. And one of the points I get into on the human capital piece is that if you go to an elite or a flagship school, they're almost always research institutions. We talk about that a little bit, but we don't really think about it. And it's one of those unknown unknowns I talked about earlier. But people don't think through the implications of that, that if it's a research school, then the faculty are not attracted to teach there. They're not incentivized to teach there. They're not particularly interested in the teaching, and they could be a really good teacher. But if the research isn't what it needs to be, you're not getting tenure. At a school like mine, You could be really good at researching, but if you stink at teaching, you're not getting tenure. So you got to have some research, but you got to be a pretty good teacher, right? But at a research school, it can go exactly it does go exactly the opposite in terms of incentives. One of the stories I share in the book is my dissertation advisor won a teaching award, and he was surprised at first to have faculty coming by, not to congratulate him, but to say, hey, you must not be working hard enough on your research. If you're winning teaching awards, you're obviously putting too much time into your teaching, and that's not what we're paying you for. And he barely didn't get tenure at that school. And so, it was a school that valued, like many of them do, research over teaching. And so, back to human capital, look, if you want a good teaching experience, then why would you go to a research school? Researchers do research, teachers do teaching, and we're not going to all be excellent at both. We're not going to be incentivized to do both. If you're looking for small classes, if you're looking for teachers who want to spend time with you rather than viewing you as an inconvenience, if you want to take essay tests instead of multiple choice tests, if you don't want lecture halls and PowerPoints and 400 students with people falling asleep and on their phones, then don't go to a school that does that, because that's typically what the research flagship elite schools are going to provide you. Not always. And it's better when you go to your upper level classes, but you're going to get a ton of classes that are of that type. And is that good for you? Is that going to build your human capital? Are you going to get lost in that shuffle if you're sitting in a bunch of 300 student classes, right? So I think it matters in general terms, like if you're trying to build human capital and have a good teaching experience. But then for certain students, it's a really big deal that it's really a terrible idea for them to go to some huge campus where teachers aren't really going to spend much time on the teaching part of their work.
Mhm. That answered my next question pretty well, but I'll ask it anyways. Is there a benefit to going to a prestigious school, even if you're not sure what you want to do or what you want to major in or what career to follow? And is there a danger in that to committing to go to expensive, prestigious school without a direct career path for the
Mhm.
credential, like you were saying?
Yeah. So you're putting a bunch of things in there. So I've answered part of it, but parts of it I haven't. And let me tease out some pieces of that. Let's hold the finances and the relevant career kind of stuff for just a second. Let me stick to the narrow part of the first part of your question, which was, are there benefits to going to an elite research school? Absolutely. The credential's stronger, right? When you go to people and go, hey, I went to such and such a school, that's more impressive. And frankly, it's more impressive in the job market many times. So yes, absolutely. I think it also has a tremendous value if you're likely to go on to grad school. So that's another thing, right? It looks more impressive to people that are in the grad schools in admissions who are among these research and elite flagship sorts of schools to see people coming from those experiences. And then related to that, I would say in the sciences and areas where you're more prone to be doing actual research as an undergrad, and that being connected, that they have resources that the smaller schools, the regional comprehensives like mine, don't have. We have some pretty cool stuff there, but we can't match the big schools, right? So I think if research is a thing for your career, that's a great argument. If grad school is a big deal, I would lean that direction. And certainly the credential part is not, it's a something, right? That's definitely a thing. But I guess from back to informing students, you got to think about both of those. I think everyone thinks about the elite and the credential and the signal it sends. Everyone knows that part, but they're not thinking hard enough about the kind of classroom experiences they're going to have at the two different kinds of schools.
Hmm.
If you want to go to the finance part, or do you want to go somewhere else for now? You want to talk
Um,
finances and relevant careers and all that?
yeah, we could do that part.
Yeah, I think those two things dovetail a bit. I talk about college as the great middle class reflex toward the beginning of the book, and it's not quite that way, as much that way anymore, but there's still a lot of that, right? If you're a good student, then you go to college. And if you go to college, then you go to a really good college, or you go to the best college you can, or whatever. These days, people are not so much into that. The trades have gotten more interesting. People are more worried about debt than they used to be. They're more wary of experience in higher ed, particularly conservative parents sending their kids off to, they're worried about propaganda, indoctrination, and all kinds of other stuff. So I think it's not what it was, but there's still a heavy reflex part of this. I talk about this later in the book, but I can never recommend going into debt for an undergrad degree. I don't understand the point of that. I just think people are terrible at personal finance on this. The rate of return is just not there generally. Uh, the rate of return varies by field. We might talk about that later, but in any case, the differences between, say, a regional comprehensive university like mine, the level of education, the level of credential, the level of all those things, I don't see how that merits going into, let's say $80,000 worth of debt. Most, I don't know the exact number, but we have a very high proportion of our students that graduate without debt. And that's huge because who wants an extra house payment without the house? It just really, if you know anything about the power of compound interest and the beauties of compound interest in your investment life, it goes the exact opposite direction. When you've got loans and all kinds of stuff going on, man, it just makes it difficult to build wealth. And so, again, there's exceptions to the rule. And if you have the money, I'm not saying don't spend it, but I can't see going into debt. I think another piece of this is that people forget that college is a bundle of goods. Economists talk about this, right? Politics, it's a bundle. When you vote for a candidate, you're not voting for one thing, you're voting for this bundle, right? College is made up of college and the college experience. And so, frankly, people aren't really looking at the education many times, or that's not the top priority. They just want to send Johnny and Jenny off to college and they want their kids to have the college experience. And the kids want the college experience. Okay, fine, but that's not college per se. That's not the education piece in the classroom. Education's occurring, right? You're making mistakes, you're learning, right? But a lot of times we treat college like a finishing school from a parent's perspective. I'm just going to send them off at 18 and they're going to do some stupid stuff and I hope it doesn't kill them or wreck their life or whatever. And they're going to learn a bunch of stuff about life and they're going to come out of this process, this black box process that I don't really understand, except I get a degree at the end, they can get a good job and they suddenly kind of magically come out pretty mature. Right. Well, that's because they lived away from home and you're paying 20 grand a year or whatever the numbers are, right, to finish them, to go through this process. So I don't think people tease that out enough. They don't think about college and the college experience. And some people just want the college experience more than the education. They want to go to football games. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have a football team in my school. If you want those kinds of things, if you want, most people with dorm life and awesome extracurriculars and all that. We don't have that. I mean, that's a downside of our experience, but you'll also graduate without debt. So, it's just trade-offs. As an economist, we're always talking about benefits and costs. And that's just, good analysis, whether we're talking about public policy or business decisions or your personal choices. Man, lay the benefits and costs out there. And a big one is what it costs you and the debt that often goes into that. And I don't think people do a good cost benefit analysis many times.
I would definitely agree with that. When I was in high school, it didn't seem like there were other options. It was just the default path.
Mhm.
And most people who did good in school just went to state schools and didn't have a second thought about debt or anything like that.
Yeah.
But my next question is, how can students choose a major that aligns with their goals without sacrificing exploration or intellectual development, especially at a young age at 18 going into college when you're not
Mhm.
sure what you want to do for the rest of your life?
Yeah, let me start with some Christian theology here. Genesis 1 says we're created in God's image, and that means we are made ourselves to create things. There's something in us that gets a kick out of creating, making things, working with people, producing. There's something in us that enjoys that. And then in Genesis 2, we read that the first thing that God gives to Adam is his work, even before Eve rolls around. His relationships, ultimately marriage, right? Even before that, Adam is given work, vocation, career, things to do. Again, that is fundamental to who we are as human persons. And so, given that, okay, what's that mean? Well, life's too long and life's too short to do something you don't like doing, or to work with people who are tools, or to be in an environment where you're not respected or whatever. And so you need to use college or whatever training you're going to pursue, or owning a business. I mean, there's lots of paths. I tell my boys only uh, two or three of the four are going to get through college, and we're like, that's fine. I don't need you to go to college. I just need you to have a way to make a living, and people get sideways on that. They think, oh, I got to make money. Okay, right. You got to make money, but that doesn't mean you pursue something you find sterile and has no self-actualization for you in it. Uh, yeah, money matters, but man, there's more to life than money. You've got to enjoy the work. We work so much in our lives, whether it's a stay-at-home parent raising kids, or whether it's being an accountant, or it's works with nonprofits or on the boards of this, that, and the other. I mean, there's so much we do that constitutes work, and you got to figure out what's going to make you reasonably happy and make money, and the trade-offs between those, and kind of work environment you're going to have, the kind of standard of living you're going to have, not just in terms of the money, but in terms of just the satisfaction you have from your work. So I don't know. I think generally this generation is better at that than maybe previous generations, but there's still this tendency, at least for some people, to be a little too functional with the idea of work, and just go, I got to make money. I'm going to be a nurse because they make good money. I'm going to be an accountant because they make good money. Okay, just slow down a little bit. What do you like doing, and what kind of environments do you want to put yourself in? What kind of career are you going to have? Are you, maybe we can shift into AI and those kind of things, right? Are you going into a field that's not going to be replaced soon by AI, or global trade or something like that? So students should also be looking a bit into the future as best they can, and building general skills that will translate nicely to lots of different types of work and career, and do a little bit of trying to analyze, where various industries are going given technology, trade, and so on.
Is there a way for universities to balance focusing on and prioritizing majors that have a good job outcome and return of investments versus more creative endeavors like a major in painting, which does not have a good job outlook? And is it moral for universities to charge $100,000 degrees in painting when students might come out and not make much money in that?
I think, I'm an economist, so we're not fond of talking about morality much, but as a Christian, I'm going to definitely bring it in. So to combine some things here with ethics, I wouldn't say there's a big problem with charging 100 grand for someone to get a painting degree if they want to pay it, right? It's a voluntary, mutually beneficial trade, and you want to major in painting and you want to pay 100 grand, that's cool. Where it gets sideways for me in that regard is that higher ed is subsidized, right? So it's not just you paying 100 grand, it's taxpayers, average taxpayers paying for upper middle income people typically to go get that degree. So why am I taking money from, the guy down the street to finance your degree? That's much more problematic. So the fact that higher ed's subsidized causes more trouble. Then we got the subsidized loan thing, the whole thing with the Biden administration, and using executive orders to try and get around student loans. And again, who's going to pay those? They were pretending like, oh yeah, they just leave the books. Well, no, that means taxpayers pick it up. Again, you're looking to take money from this average guy to finance the student debt. What are we doing here, right? So there's a piece there. One of the things I really liked about that discussion was it got partway towards what would have been, I think, the ultimate answer to your question, which is, if we're going to subsidize education, which I don't think that's a great idea, but if we're going to do that, then have the universities have some stake in the matter, right? If their students default on the loans, have it come out of the university's pocket. Right now, they don't have any skin in the game. For all they care, I don't care if you get an art degree. There's no skin off their teeth to finance a degree like that. But if that student that graduate can't get a job or doesn't pay the loans back, then put the universities on the hook. And as an economist, I'll tell you incentives matter, and that'll change things quite a bit. So I think I'd like to see that if the government's going to be in the subsidizing higher ed space, and especially in the loan space, then make sure that the universities have some skin in the game. And I think you'll see the sort of changes in behavior that you were alluding to.
Mhm. And it puts the accountability back on the universities, like you were saying. One of the biggest factors when choosing school is cost. Tuition is rising, and a lot of people are asking questions like, is this 100,000 degree worth it? Which we've been talking about a little. What questions should families ask about tuition, financial aid, and long-term debt before committing?
Well, they need to write it all down. Need to look at their options. They need to hopefully be good at personal finance before their kids get to college and they have some money laying around in an account. I mean, there's a lot of things connected here, work and personal finance and savings. And I think people also miss that there are incentive problems prospectively for the student. If you pay for everything and the student has no skin in the game, well, that's an incentive problem. Um, so a couple of things to say there. One would be it kills me how parents, there's privacy laws where parents can't get involved in their kids' education unless the forms are signed. And so if I'm paying for the college, then I'm going to make sure before I pay for the college that I have access to those things. I'm not going to just write my 18-year-old in essence a $20,000 check and say, hey, good luck to you. I guess we'll see the grades sometime. That's not sufficient monitoring, in my view. It kills me how parents set themselves up and set their kids up for failure there. Um, I'm also struck by how in my generation, it was, I think, a bit easier to pay for college. Like I paid my way through college. My parents were divorced. Their net worth was just north of zero. And so I got to live at home. Went to George Mason University, had a nice education in economics there, but lived at home and then was paying my way through working jobs and on and on. And it's funny when you talk to someone like me who's had that experience, they'll tell you the glories of that, the glories and the difficulties of that phase in their life. And they'll usually say something like, man, it was tough, but I learned so much. I learned how to manage my time and my money, and I had to make some trade-offs, but I just, I got such great pride in working my way through. And then later in the conversation, they'll say something like, and so I can't wait to pay for my kids. It's like, wait a second. You just said that this other method that you went through was glorious. And now you're about to go the exact opposite direction with your own kid. I don't, you lost me there. I don't really understand the disconnect there. So I think parents get, I don't know if it's a parenting style or guilt, or I don't know what's going on there, but I think parents don't really think very clearly about those things. One intermediate step you can take that's pretty modest, actually two intermediate steps that I encourage in the book. One is you can have your kids pay for their own books or half of their books or something. Get their skin in the game a little bit. As you know, as a student, there were courses where you had a lot of options on books. And if you got a blank check, you probably make one decision. And if you're picking up half the tab, you probably make other decisions. And again, a blank check there, I'm not sure what we're doing. Incentives matter. Let's get the kid involved in these decisions and have a little bit of skin in the game. And then if your student does poorly, maybe you have a mulligan or two, but at some point, look, you get a D or an F, you're paying for that one. I'm not paying for more than one or two of those. And again, let's get some skin in the game here. So I think there are some basic things like that that could prevent some trouble, get kids to make better decisions, put parents in a less vulnerable is not quite the right word, but like they're putting themselves in a rough spot. What happens if Johnny or Jenny bring back some bad grades or have a bad experience and you don't have any of this stuff in place? It just makes things weird and awkward. So I think where possible to be, I don't know, Don't just write a blank check, just spend a little time thinking about incentives. And it really depends on the kid too, is a lot of this, right? What's good for your kid?
Hmm. And what role do colleges have in being transparent about graduation rates, earning outcomes, and student debt? Or do you think the responsibility should rest solely on the students and parents who are making the commitment to go to college?
Yeah, I mean, the bulk of it goes to parents and students, but I'm not a huge fan of regulation and those sorts of things. But if the government's going to provide some money, then they can make the rules, and it's not an unreasonable rule to provide low cost, accurate information about outcomes in education. So, I mean, I wouldn't be standing on the street corner advocating such things, but I, I wouldn't be fighting it either. I think that would be helpful for people making decisions. But most of that stuff's out there. I mean, we kind of know. You use the example of a painting degree, right? We know that engineers do okay, and we know that liberal arts majors struggle more so. And that's not brain surgery. That's pretty common knowledge. We kind of know what tuition and fees and books are going to cost and what it's going to cost to live in the dorms and a bougie dorm or an apartment or whatever it is. We kind of know that stuff already. So I don't think that's a big problem. But yeah, I mean, I'm all for accountability and information.
Hmm. And the next few questions I have regard academic quality. Do you believe there should be a stronger emphasis on core knowledge, Western studies, liberal arts, etc., in undergraduate education?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And there's the theory of that and the practice. So let's start with the theory of that. As an economist, I'm going to lean towards the market, that the market ought to say those things are valuable or not, and we're going to provide degrees of various types. I think you see some of that with shrinking of gen ed. So I think the market is kind of angling that direction. Now, what does gen ed look like? Should it be more conservative, more Western? I guess I would, mostly leave that up to the marketplace. What was the second part of the question?
Go back up. Do you believe there should be a stronger emphasis on core knowledge, Western studies, liberal arts, etc., in undergraduate education?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could. Oh, I know. It was not a two-part question. I had a two-part answer, and I forgot my own second part. So the second part of the answer is that a lot of this is being undermined anyway because of online education and dual credit. And so a lot of college students aren't taking those courses in college anyway. Now, if they're majoring in those things, of course, they'll take a bunch of those things. That's not who we're really talking about. I think we're talking about gen ed, and gen ed is mostly achieved through online transfer, community college, and especially high school credits. If you're a good high school student in a relatively permissive state in terms of dual credit, I mean, in Indiana, kids sometimes come out with an associate's degree. So I don't think people are really taking those courses. So I understand the debate in theory and practice. I just don't think it's a big deal practically. I just, it's secondary in practice because of the way students are actually negotiating those kind of courses today. They just take them online, and that is, they've gamed the system. And I think the point's moved, really.
Hmm. What kinds of academic experiences best develop critical thinking, and how can students seek them out?
Well, we talked about AI a little bit. One of the phrases I really like on this comes from Joshua Mitchell in his book, American Awakening. And I'm sure other people have talked about it, but that's where I picked it up. But he talks about AI and many other things as the difference between a substitute and a supplement. There's a lot of things in life that are wonderful as a supplement, but they're terrible as a substitute. So, for example, AI. AI is a wonderful tool. AI can help you learn things. Great. Learning how to use I would recommend that. Okay. But if you're using AI to get through a course and not learn anything, that's usually not going to be real helpful for you. Social media. Okay. That's a nice supplement to your life. If it becomes your life, you're a loser. Right. So that's not the way you want to go. So there's a lot of things like that in life where there's a supplement substitute thing. So I think that's one thing, is that students need to as best they can, put aside this short run temptation to just kind of get through a course, to game the course, to whatever. We're dealing with this right now with our first stats course in the business curriculum and the online sections. Just trying to figure out, how do we set it up where it's not gamed? Is it even possible to set that up in an online setting if we don't bring them in for testing? And right now we've got a lot of students gaming that course. And part of me is like, really, you really want to go through your life being innumerate, being just having no understanding of numbers and basic statistics? Really, that's how you want to roll? I don't understand that. So, again, it's tempting always to think short term, but man, do what you can to think long term. Do I really want to be in a position where I cannot do these things, or am I just a moron about this basic literacy stuff? That can't be a good move in a globalized economy with AI breathing down my neck. How is that a smart use of time and money? And again, why am I paying 25 grand per year to game a system and get a credential? Is it really worth that? It's hard to imagine.
Mhm. And you discussed prestigious schools, being research schools, and sometimes, you get different educations from that. We discuss costs, but what else can high school students look out for when choosing a college so they can ensure they get the best education possible for them?
One quick thing, in academics, we talk about R1 and R2 sorts of schools, and they have PhDs and grad programs and all kinds of other stuff. But really, what it comes down to is the teaching load. And I talk about this in the book. To know what kinds of teachers are out there. There's a difference between professors, lecturers, adjuncts. You should know that. But I think when you go on a tour, or if you're asking whatever, getting information, it's just as simple, really, as asking what the teaching load of the professor is, because that tells you what they're being paid to do, and it tells you how they're being incentivized. So inside baseball, we talk about schools, professors do, by the teaching load. So we'll say, like, my school's a 3-3 because I teach 3 courses in the fall and 3 in the spring. And a 3-3 school has research, because I'm not teaching so much that I can't do research, but teaching is more valuable than research. There are schools that are elite liberal arts schools, or they're further down the food chain than we are, and they may have a 4-4 or even a 5-5 load for the typical professor. And if you're doing that much teaching and grading, you're not doing much research, if any. And so that's all about the teaching. Right? So there's not much research, very little research at a school like that. Teaching is a high priority. If you go to, a highfalutin liberal arts college, you better have small class sizes and teachers who will care about the classroom experience and mentor you and all that. That's what you're paying for. A school like ours, teaching is over research. You go to an elite or flagship school, move down that direction, it's a 2-2 teaching load or a 1-2 teaching load. And so now research is over teaching. Back to some of the examples we talked about before. Teaching is not all that important. It's all about the research. The lower that load goes, it tells you what the priority of the school is. And a lot of these 1-2, 1-1, or even 2-2 schools, the high-end teachers are all in the grad program anyway. You're not going to get to meet them. You're going to get grad students and adjuncts and lecturers, and some of them are wonderful teachers. Some of them not so much. You're going to get those huge lecture hall experiences, but you can kind of predict what the school's like by the teaching load. A 3-3 is going to give you this, a 2-2 is going to give you this. And that's just a kind of a quick way to measure what they're going to deliver to you.
Hmm. And what changes do you see in the future regarding universities and new AI technology? A lot of universities are implementing AI programs and teaching students about AI, and some aren't. Do you think academia in general will be changing a lot in the future?
Yeah, I mean, AI is what everyone's talking about. AI presents some opportunities, and it presents a lot of challenges in the classroom. I think we're going to handle that one pretty well, but we'll see. I mean, AI is something we're going to have to teach students how to write prompts. But again, a moron with AI isn't going to give you good answers. You have to know how to write the prompt. You have to know what to do with the prompt. You have to know when the output from the AI is a hallucination or not helpful, or AI likes to flatter us. AI doesn't write very well and probably never will in the sense that it'll crank out kind of, moderate goop, but um, there's still a value in knowing how to think and knowing how to, prompt the AI. So I think that kind of stuff is challenging, but I think doable for education. I think the far larger challenge is online education and then online interacting with AI. So every time I teach online, it is it's a challenge to write tests that cannot be gamed, to set up uh, time constraints on tests, to disguise questions. I have students handwrite their answers. So even if they're looking stuff up on AI, they at least have to handwrite it, that it's a time constrained test, so they run out of time. I know from my face-to-face sections, they should be able to finish this test in this time. And when they can't, I know they're looking stuff up and they're not going to pass because they're not going to finish the test. So it can be done, but it is a lot of work. And so my concern is, particularly at the research schools, are they really putting that work in? Again, at a research school, they're not incentivized to worry about those kinds of things. So why would they? Why wouldn't they just do an online class of 100 students and set up some kind of multiple choice thing that you can game really easily and you don't learn a thing in that class? So higher ed, I think, has a tremendous problem. One way to get around this would be to put that information on the transcript. You were talking earlier about transparency and accountability. And if there were simply a marking on the transcript that I took such and such course online, I think the market would start to help with that quite a bit more, where an employer would see, oh, Reagan took 34 online classes. I'm not sure I trust that. Or maybe I handle the interview with Reagan differently, right? Because I see all these online courses she took. I think interviewing will change also. There'll be much more competency based interviews, but the value of the credential that we talked about earlier takes a real hit if higher ed doesn't figure this out. Because if people can routinely game the system and gain the piece of paper, then the piece of paper isn't an effective signal or screen like it used to be. So I think unless we figure out the online piece of it, and I've got some real concerns there, uh, higher ed, I think, has some real problems if they don't get that figured out.
Do you think that will make college more or less valuable or just change overall and stay the
Yeah,
same?
I think it lowers the value, right? You make the signal messy, you make the screening less effective, so it hurts the human capital piece. Why are you going to pay 100 grand to send Johnny and Jenny off to school to game a system? Well, what are we doing here? So if the human capital is not being built, that's not good. If the signal gets a lot messier, that's not good, right? If I hand you a piece of paper that says I graduated from blank and you're like, you could still be a huge moron. I got no idea what that means. Then what's the value of the piece of paper? So you kill the signaling function or harm it. You undermine the human capital. Why are people going to pay for that? So where the market, I hope will take us is back to kind of face-to-face experiences, transparency on the transcripts, things where the market can again provide true higher education, both the human capital and the signaling piece of it.
Mhm. And those are all the questions I have. Is there anything else you would like to say about your book or touch on things that maybe I didn't ask?
It's a $3 book. I mean, it's not much. So it's just a little guide. It's, I don't know, 60 pages. There's the paperback. There's not much to it. Big, a lot of margins and fonts and all that. So we're not talking war and peace here. But I think going back to known unknowns and unknown unknowns, that, in any profession, any setting, what should worry us are the things we think we know that we don't. And with respect to something expensive and important, and we can get into the ideology. I mean, you're sending your kids off to the wolves and blah blah blah. I mean, there's a bunch of things here where you can. It's a big decision, and so you know, I guess weigh things carefully. We've talked about that before, but I think my book really helps with showing people things that they didn't know were a thing. And so, unless you like get, getting blindsided by stuff you didn't know was a thing. Where are you going to get that information? Talk to a professor. Professors know the inside scoop. So to me, it's kind of an inside baseball. I explain another chapter in there is why we even have tenure in the first place. That's an uh, interesting conversation, I think. So I think it's just inside baseball, and it's not a complicated read, but just putting it out there for people to have another resource.